My name's Alex. I was 24 when I took the night job at the morgue. I told people it was temporary, something to get me through a rough stretch. It sounded easier than explaining why I didn't mind the quiet, or why I needed something that didn't ask questions back. I made my first mistake on the third night shift. It didn't feel like a mistake at the time. It felt like one more small decision in a long line of routine tasks. There was paperwork, a body waiting, and the usual pressure to keep things moving before morning staff came in. I remember thinking I was finally getting the hang of it. That I wasn't as slow as the first night. That I could do this job without it getting to me. I didn't realize it at the time. The morgue was in the lower level of the hospital, past a set of double doors that always closed too slowly behind you. The air changed the moment you stepped in. It wasn't just cold, it was controlled, deliberate. You could smell disinfectant first, sharp and clean, and then something dull underneath it. Not rot, not exactly. Just absence. I got the job through a guy my cousin knew. No formal training, just a quick walkthrough, a list of procedures, and a supervisor who said, "Don't rush, and don't assume." I nodded like that made sense. On the first night, I barely spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, and everything felt too bright for a place like that. By the third shift, I had stopped noticing the hum. The work was simple on paper. Bodies came in from different departments or from outside, accidents, natural deaths, sometimes cases waiting for examination. Each one had documentation, name, time of death, identification number. My job was to receive them, verify the paperwork, attach the correct tag, and place them in the assigned refrigeration unit. It was repetitive. Mechanical. You learned to avoid looking at faces for too long. Not because it was scary, but because it made things slower. And slowness was a problem during night shifts, especially when multiple transfers came in within a few hours. There were forms to sign. Always forms. Clipboards with thin stacks of paper that smelled faintly like ink and latex gloves. I got used to the sound of plastic tags snapping into place, the soft roll of the gurney wheels, the metallic click of the chamber doors. I told myself it was just logistics. That night, it was busier than usual. 2 arrivals close together, both from different departments. 1 elderly male, 1 younger female. The paperwork came in slightly out of order, handed off quickly by a nurse who looked like she hadn't slept in days. She gave me a quick rundown, pointed at the files, and left before I could ask anything. I remember rubbing my eyes. Just for a second. I was tired. I didn't double-check. I took the first body in, matched what I thought was the correct document, filled in the log, attached the tag, and moved it into one of the middle chambers. Then I went back for the second one. Same process. Same motions. I didn't notice anything wrong. Everything lined up in my head. Name, number, placement. It felt smooth. That should have been the warning. It was maybe an hour later when I started feeling that small, quiet discomfort. Not panic. Just something off. I was going through the logbook again, mostly out of habit. Rewriting a smudged number. Fixing a line that looked messy. And then I saw it. The time stamps didn't match. At first, I thought I'd just written one of them down wrong. It happens. You fix it and move on. But when I checked the intake forms, the discrepancy was still there. The order of arrival didn't align with the tags I had already attached. I paused. Something didn't match. I went back to the chambers. The cold hit harder that time, or maybe I just noticed it more. I opened one of the doors, looked at the tag, then at the paper in my hand. The name was correct for one of them, but not for the body I was looking at. My chest tightened, but not in a dramatic way. It was quieter than that. Just a steady drop. I checked the second chamber. Same issue, reversed. The tags were swapped. I stood there for a while, holding both clipboards, trying to reconstruct what I had done. I replayed the sequence in my head, step by step. The nurse handing me the documents. The order I thought I followed. The moment I decided not to double-check because it all seemed obvious. It wasn't obvious. I had mixed them up. The mistake itself wasn't loud. No alarms. No immediate consequence. But I knew what it meant. If left like that, everything downstream would be wrong. Records, reports, possibly even released to families. I felt the weight of it settle slowly. There was a phone on the wall. I looked at it longer than I should have. I could fix it. Quietly. Just switch the tags, correct the log, make sure everything matched again. No one would know. It was still early enough. The morning staff hadn't arrived. Or I could report it. That meant explaining exactly what I did. Admitting I skipped a verification step I had been explicitly told not to skip. It meant paperwork, maybe disciplinary action. Maybe losing the job I had just started to understand. I stood in that cold room, thinking about how small the mistake had felt when it happened. Mistakes don't always look big when they happen. I switched the tags. My hands were steady, but slower this time. I checked each letter, each number, twice. Then a third time. I corrected the logbook, aligning the entries with the right identities. When I was done, everything looked clean again. Consistent. Like nothing had ever been wrong. But I knew. The rest of the shift passed in silence. Louder than usual. The next morning, my supervisor skimmed the logs without much comment. No questions. No raised eyebrows. I stood there, waiting for something, anything, that would expose what had happened. Nothing came. I kept working. Days turned into weeks. I got better at the routine. More careful. Slower, even when it annoyed people. I developed this habit of pausing before every tag, reading it out in my head, matching it against the document, then doing it again just to be sure. No one told me to do that. I just couldn't not do it. I never told anyone about that third night. Not the supervisor, not my cousin, not even myself in a way that felt complete. It stayed in that quiet place where small decisions live. The kind that don't seem important until they are. Sometimes, when a new body comes in and the paperwork is handed over too quickly, I feel that same moment creeping back. That split second where it would be easier to trust the flow and move on. I don't. I stop. I check. And then I check again. I still check every tag twice that I stayed on that job longer than I expected. Long enough for the routine to stop feeling new, but not long enough to forget why I started paying attention to every small detail. People assume you either get used to a place like that or you don't. That it either hardens you or breaks you. It's not that simple. You just adjust your behavior around the things you can't control. You build small habits that make you feel like nothing will slip again. Like you've closed every gap where a mistake could hide. I told myself that. But the truth was quieter. I didn't trust myself the same way after that third night. The morgue didn't change. The same hum from the lights. The same low vibration from the refrigeration units running constantly in the background. The same smell of disinfectant that settled into your clothes even after you left. What changed was how I moved through it. Slower. More deliberate. Almost careful to the point of being noticed. One of the older techs, Martin, mentioned it once. He leaned against the counter while I was rechecking a set of intake forms, watching me flip the pages back and forth. "You know you already logged that, right?" he said. "I know." He waited a second, like he expected more of an explanation. I didn't give one. "You'll fall behind if you keep doing that," he added, not unkindly. "I won't," I said. But I did, sometimes. Not enough to cause problems. Just enough for people to notice I wasn't keeping pace when things got busy. I didn't mind. Busy nights still came in waves. Ambulances at odd hours, paperwork passed between hands too quickly, signatures half legible. The difference now was that I didn't let myself move on until I was certain everything matched. Name. Date. Time. Tag. Again. Name. Date. Time. Tag. It became a rhythm. There was one night, maybe a month after the first mistake, when that rhythm started to slip again. Not because I rushed. Because something else didn't feel right. It started with a transfer from another facility. Late. Past 2 in the morning. Those were usually quieter, less chaotic. The paperwork arrived in a sealed folder, more organized than what we typically got from the ER. I remember noticing that. It made me less tense, which in hindsight wasn't a good thing. I signed for the body, checked the documents, and everything looked correct at first glance. The name was clear. The ID number matched the form. Time of death recorded, location listed, even the secondary verification signature was there. Clean. Too clean, maybe. I didn't think that at the time. I went through the process the way I always did now. Slower than before. Careful. I read the name twice before attaching the tag. Then again after. Everything matched. But something stayed in the back of my head. Not a clear thought. Just a hesitation that didn't go away after I closed the chamber door. I stood there a little longer than necessary. The cold felt sharper that night. I told myself it was nothing. That I was overcorrecting. Looking for problems where there weren't any because of what happened before. That kind of thinking can slow you down too much. Make you second-guess everything. I walked back to the desk. Sat down. Opened the folder again. The paper had that dry, slightly rough texture you notice when your hands are cold. I ran my finger along the printed lines, reading slower this time. Name. Same. ID number. Same. Time. That's where I paused. It wasn't wrong. Not exactly. But it didn't fit the transfer time. There was a gap that didn't make sense if you thought about how long it should have taken to move the body from one facility to another. I checked the intake log from the sending facility. The timestamp was earlier than what I had. Not by much. Enough. Enough to matter. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the numbers like they might adjust themselves if I waited. They didn't. Something didn't match. Again. This time, I didn't feel that same drop in my chest. It was more controlled. More focused. Like my body recognized the pattern and skipped straight to the part where I had to decide what to do. I stood up and went back to the chamber. Opened it. Looked at the tag. Then at the face. I usually avoided that part. But this time I didn't. There was no immediate answer there. Nothing obvious that would tell me the paperwork was wrong or the body was different from what it should be. Just a person who wasn't going to confirm anything for me. I closed the door. Slower. Back at the desk, I checked the secondary documents again. Cross-referenced the ID number with the transfer sheet. Everything aligned except the timing. It could have been a clerical delay. A late entry. Someone writing down the wrong hour under pressure. It happens. That explanation sat there, easy and convenient. But I didn't like it. I picked up the phone this time. My hand hovered for a second before dialing. Not because I didn't know who to call. Because I knew that once I did, it wouldn't stay small anymore. It would become a question that needed an answer. Something that would involve more people, more attention. More risk. I called the sending facility. It rang longer than I expected. When someone finally answered, their voice sounded tired. The same kind of tired I remembered from my first nights. I gave them the ID number. Asked them to confirm the time of death and transfer. There was a pause on the other end. Papers moving. A keyboard tapping lightly. Then they gave me the time. It didn't match mine. Not even close enough to explain it away. I felt that quiet pressure again. Not panic. Just certainty. Something was wrong. Are you sure? I asked. Another pause. Yes, they said. That's what we have here. I thanked them and hung up. The room felt smaller after that. I looked at the folder on the desk. At the clean, organized documents that had seemed reassuring an hour ago. Now they felt off. Too precise in the wrong places. I had a choice again. I could adjust the time in our log to match theirs. Blame it on a delay in documentation. Keep everything consistent on our end and move on. Or I could report the discrepancy. Open it up. Let it become something bigger. I thought about the third night. About how easy it had been to fix things quietly. How nothing had come back to me after. But this wasn't the same. This wasn't my mistake. Not yet. It would become mine if I tried to hide it. I called my supervisor. Woke him up. Explained the situation as clearly as I could, sticking to the facts. ID numbers. Timestamps. Transfer records. There was a long silence on the line when I finished. Then he said, "Don't touch anything." I didn't. The next few hours moved differently. Slower, but heavier. People came in earlier than usual. Questions were asked. Documents checked and rechecked. The body stayed where it was. Untouched. I stayed near the desk, answering when I was asked, replaying every step I had taken that night in my head. Looking for a place where I might have introduced the error. I didn't find one. By morning, it was clear the issue came from the sending facility. A documentation mix-up. 2 records partially overlapping, one time recorded incorrectly before transfer. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No visible fallout in front of me. Just a quiet correction. But this time, it didn't feel like I had escaped something. It felt like I had stopped it early. My supervisor pulled me aside before I left. "You did the right thing," he said. I nodded. It didn't feel like something I deserved credit for. It felt like the minimum. Like correcting a path I had already stepped off once before. On my way out, I passed the double doors again. They closed slowly behind me, the same way they always did. The air shifted back to normal, warmer, less controlled. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. Thinking about how close routine always is to becoming assumption. How easy it is to let things slide when they look correct on the surface. And how hard it is to trust yourself after you've proven you can miss something important. I still work there. Still on night shifts. Still moving slower than some people think I should. But I don't argue about it anymore. Because I know exactly what happens in the space between, "it looks right," and, "it is right." And I know how quiet that space can be. I still check every tag twice that I didn't think there would be a third time. After that second incident, I told myself I had adjusted enough. That whatever I missed before, I had built systems around it now. Slower work. Repetition. Quiet checks no one asked for. It felt controlled. Predictable. That's the dangerous part. When nothing goes wrong for a while, you stop expecting it to. The night settled into a pattern again. Same doors. Same hum. Same steady cold that never fully left your hands, even through gloves. I started recognizing the handwriting on certain forms. Certain nurses who rushed. Others who didn't. I learned where mistakes usually came from. Or at least, I thought I did. It was a Friday night. I remember that because weekends always felt slightly different. Fewer administrative staff, more gaps in communication, more things handed over between people who didn't usually work together. More space for something to slip. The intake that night was steady, not overwhelming. Enough to keep me moving, but not enough to rush. I kept my pace. Careful. Measured. At some point, a body came in from a private transport service. That already meant extra paperwork. Different formatting. External documentation attached to hospital forms. More layers to go through. I didn't mind that. More layers meant more chances to catch something. The driver stayed longer than usual. He stood near the door while I checked the documents, like he was waiting for me to finish. Not impatient. Just watching. I noticed it, but didn't think much of it. I went through the process. Name. ID. Transfer authorization. Signature. Everything was there. I remember the smell of his jacket. Cold air and something like cigarette smoke that had settled into the fabric. It mixed strangely with the disinfectant in the room. I signed off. He left. The door closed slowly behind him. I moved the body in. Routine. Back at the desk, I started logging the details. My handwriting had gotten neater over time. Smaller. More controlled. Less chance of misreading something later. I wrote the name once. Then again, under the internal record. And that's when I hesitated. Not because something was clearly wrong. Because something felt familiar. I looked at the name again. I had seen it before. Not often. Not enough to remember exactly where. Just enough to feel that slight tension in the back of my head. I didn't like that feeling. I opened the digital log. Searched the name. It came up. Entry from 2 days earlier. Same name. Different ID number. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. It's not impossible. Names repeat. People share them. It happens. But the timing was close. Too close. I pulled up the earlier record. Compared the details. Age, different. Place of death, different. But the name was identical. First and last. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. This could still be nothing. Just coincidence. But I had learned not to move on from could be nothing too quickly. I stood up again. Went back to the chamber. Opened it. Looked at the tag. Then back at the document. Everything matched. Again. But now I had something to compare it to. I pulled the earlier file from the cabinet. Physical copy. Slightly creased from being handled. The paper felt colder than the new one. I placed them side by side. Read them slowly. Line by line. The difference in ID numbers stood out. They weren't close. Not a simple transposition error. Completely separate sequences. That meant 2 different individuals. Same name. Close in time. It happens. But then I noticed something else. The date of birth on the new document. It was off. Not dramatically. Just enough that, when compared to the recorded age, it didn't align perfectly. A small inconsistency. The kind you could ignore if you wanted to. I didn't. Something didn't match. Again. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. Controlled, but present. Not panic. Recognition. I checked the transport authorization again. The signature looked rushed. The printed name underneath it was slightly misaligned, like it had been copied into the template without adjusting the spacing. Details. Small ones. But they stacked. I looked at the clock. Still hours before morning. Plenty of time to fix things quietly. That thought came automatically now. Not as temptation. As an option. I could adjust the date of birth in our system to match the age. Smooth out the inconsistency. Treat it as a minor clerical error from the transport side. No one would question it. Everything else matched. Or I could escalate it. Again. I felt tired. Not physically. Something else. The kind of tired that comes from always having to decide where the line is. I sat down. Looked at both documents again. Then at the screen. Then back at the papers. I thought about the first mistake. How easy it had been to fix. How invisible it stayed. I thought about the second time. How different it felt to stop it before it settled. This wasn't clean like that second one. This sat in between. Not clearly wrong. Not clearly right. That's where it's hardest. I picked up the phone. Put it back down. Picked it up again. This time, I called the transport company. It took longer to reach someone. When they answered, the connection was slightly distorted. Background noise. Movement. I gave them the name. The ID. Asked them to confirm the details. There was a pause. Longer than I expected. Then the person on the other end said, "Can you repeat that?" I did. More silence. Then, "Hold on." I waited. The hum of the lights felt louder again. Or maybe I was just listening for something else. When they came back, their tone had changed. More alert. "That record shouldn't have been sent yet," they said. I didn't respond immediately. "What do you mean?" I asked. Another pause. "It's part of an ongoing case," they said. "Documentation isn't finalized." I looked at the body through the small reinforced window in the chamber door. Still. Unmoving. Already processed on our end. "That's the one you transferred tonight?" I asked. "Yes." The words sat there. Flat. I felt that pressure again, but sharper this time. "Your paperwork doesn't fully match," I said. "Date of birth and age are inconsistent." Silence. Then, quieter, "We'll need to call you back." They hung up. I stood there, phone still in my hand. Something had already gone wrong before it reached me. I was just the point where it stopped being contained. I called my supervisor again. Explained. Details only. No assumptions. He didn't sound surprised this time. Just tired. "Don't make any changes," he said. "And don't release anything." "I won't." The rest of the night stretched. Longer than usual. More calls came in. Questions from people above me, from departments I didn't usually deal with. I answered what I could. Repeated myself when I had to. I stayed with the facts. By morning, it was clear the situation was bigger than a simple clerical issue. There were discrepancies in multiple records tied to that case. Identity confirmation delays. Paperwork moved too early. Not my mistake. But close enough to become one if I had decided differently. My supervisor looked at me longer than usual before I left. "You're catching these," he said. I didn't answer. Because it didn't feel like catching. It felt like standing in the same place, over and over, waiting to see if something would slip past me again. On the way out, I passed the chambers one more time. Rows of closed doors. Each one labeled. Each one depending on someone like me not to assume anything. The cold didn't bother me anymore. But the quiet did. Because in that quiet, small things don't announce themselves. They sit. They wait. And if you're not paying attention, they become permanent. I don't think about the first mistake as much now. Not directly. But it's there. In every pause. In every second check. In every moment where something almost looks right. I still feel that hesitation. I let it stay. Because it's the only thing that hasn't lied to me yet. I still check every tag twice that I stopped telling myself I was getting used to it. That idea didn't hold anymore. Not after enough nights where things almost lined up but didn't. Not after realizing how often problems arrive looking complete on the surface. You don't get used to that. You just learn how to sit with it. By then, people had started treating me differently. Not in a way they said out loud. It was in small things. Someone handing me paperwork and waiting an extra second, like they expected me to find something. Or the way my supervisor would ask, "Did you check it?" even when he knew the answer. I didn't mind. It gave structure to something that didn't have much of it. The morgue was the same. It always was. The lights hummed. The air stayed cold and dry. Paper still felt the same between my fingers, slightly rough, thin, easy to crease if you held it too tight. The only thing that shifted was how quiet the place felt between tasks. That kind of quiet gives you time to think. Too much, sometimes. It was late again. Around 3 in the morning. The hour where everything slows down just enough to make you aware of how tired you are. Not exhausted. Just worn at the edges. There was only one intake that hour. Unusual. Single body, no rush behind it, no overlapping paperwork. Just one set of documents, one gurney, one transfer note. Simple. I remember thinking that. Simple is easier. Less room for confusion. The nurse who brought the file didn't stay. She left it on the counter with a quick, "Everything's there," and walked out before I even looked up. The door closed softly behind her. I stood there for a moment, looking at the folder. It was thicker than usual. Not by much. Just enough to notice. I opened it. More pages than standard intake. Additional forms. A printed report attached behind the main sheet. The kind you usually see when something requires internal review later. I didn't rush. I went through it the way I always did. Name. Clear. ID number. Matched. Time. Consistent across the first 2 documents. I turned the page. There was a supplemental report. Typed. No signature yet. Just a placeholder line where one should be. I paused. That wasn't standard. And signed documents weren't supposed to be processed fully. I flipped back to the first page. Everything there looked complete. Signed. Stamped. Approved. Then the extra page, sitting behind it, not fully finalized. Something didn't match. I felt that familiar shift in my focus. The way everything else fades slightly when one detail doesn't settle right. I checked the timestamps again. Main document, 2:18 a.m. Supplemental, 2:42 a.m. Later. But attached to the same file. I looked at the clock. 3:07 a.m. So it had been added after initial documentation. That happens sometimes. Updates. Additions. But usually those are clearly marked. This wasn't. I walked to the gurney. Pulled back the sheet just enough to confirm the tag attached by the previous department. Name matched. ID matched. Everything looked clean. I covered it again. Back to the desk. I read the supplemental report more carefully this time. The language was clinical. Flat. But there was a line in the middle that stood out, not because of what it said, but because of how it was placed. It referenced a pending confirmation. Not completed. Pending. That meant something about the case wasn't final yet. And yet the body was already here. Processed for storage. I sat down slowly. The chair made a small sound against the floor. Louder than it should have been. I looked at the phone. Didn't reach for it yet. I thought through the options. I could proceed as usual. Log everything based on the signed documents. Treat the supplemental page as an update that didn't affect intake. That would be the easiest path. Or I could stop. Ask. Delay the process until everything aligned. That would slow things down. Involve more people. Create questions. I rubbed my hands together, trying to bring some warmth back into them. The cold felt sharper when I had to make decisions. I looked at the file again. Then at the chamber doors. Closed. Ordered. Each one depending on accuracy. I stood up. Walked to the storage units. Opened an empty chamber. The cold air moved out toward me in a slow wave. I waited. Just stood there, holding the door open longer than necessary. Thinking. Not about consequences. About responsibility. That word had started to feel heavier over time. Not because anyone told me it should. Because I had seen how small things connect to larger ones. Quietly. Without warning. I closed the chamber. Went back to the desk. Picked up the phone. This time, I didn't hesitate as long. I called the department listed on the supplemental report. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I checked the clock. Too early for some offices. Too late for others. That in-between space again. I felt the tension build slowly. Not urgent. Just persistent. I could wait until morning. Leave it for the next shift. Let someone else deal with it. That thought stayed for a second longer than I liked. Then I pushed it aside. I called my supervisor. He answered on the third ring. I explained. Carefully. Details only. No assumptions. There was a pause on his end. Then, hold it. I haven't logged it yet, I said. Good, he replied. Leave everything as is. I sat there after the call ended, the phone still in my hand. The room felt quieter than usual. Even the hum of the lights seemed distant. Time moved slowly after that. No new intakes. No interruptions. Just me, the file, and the body waiting to be placed. By the time morning staff started arriving, the situation had already shifted. Calls had been made above my level. People came in earlier than usual again. Different faces this time. More formal. They took the file. Reviewed it. Asked me the same questions in slightly different ways. I answered them. Stayed consistent. The supplemental report, it turned out, was attached too early. It belonged to a related case, not fully confirmed, and shouldn't have been included in the intake file yet. If I had processed everything without stopping, that report would have been logged as part of this case. Permanently. Two separate things merged into one record. Clean on the surface. Wrong underneath. By the end of the shift, it was corrected. Quietly. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. My supervisor found me before I left. You're slowing things down, he said. I waited. Then he added, keep doing it. I nodded. There wasn't anything else to say. On my way out, I passed the desk where new files were already being stacked for the next shift. Fresh paper. Clean edges. No visible problems. I knew better than to trust that. Outside, the air felt warmer, but not by much. Early morning. Gray light. The kind that doesn't fully wake you up. I stood there for a moment. Thinking about how different the job looked from the outside. Quiet. Orderly. Controlled. And how much of it depended on noticing the things that didn't announce themselves. The ones that almost fit. The ones that could pass if you let them. I don't think about leaving the job anymore. Not in the way I used to. Now it feels like something I have to see through. Not because I want to. Because I know what happens if people stop paying attention. It doesn't fall apart all at once. It shifts. Quietly. One detail at a time. And no one notices until it's already part of the record. I still feel that moment before every decision. That pause. That hesitation. I let it stay. Because that's where the difference is. Between doing the job. And doing it right. I still check every tag twice. By that point, I had stopped counting the nights. They blurred together in a way that didn't feel like time passing, more like repetition settling deeper each shift. Same corridors. Same light. Same cold that never quite reached your bones but stayed close enough to remind you where you were. I didn't think of the job as temporary anymore. I also didn't think of it as something I belonged to. It was just something I did carefully. That was the difference now. Carefully. Not quickly. Not efficiently. Just carefully. The last incident didn't start with anything unusual. That's what stayed with me the most. There was no pressure, no backlog, no visible reason for something to go wrong. It was a quiet night. Too quiet, maybe. I was alone for most of it. Martin had called in sick, and the backup hadn't shown yet. That left me with the intake desk, the logbooks, and the chambers. I didn't mind being alone. But the silence was heavier when there was no one else moving through it. Around 1:30, a body came in from the hospital upstairs. No external transfer, no additional paperwork. Just standard intake. Clean. I remember the wheels of the gurney sounding louder than usual against the floor. A dull, steady rhythm that echoed slightly in the hallway before the doors closed. The nurse handed me the file without saying much. She looked tired. Everyone did at that hour. Everything's signed, she said. I nodded. Waited until she left. Then I opened the folder. Name. Clear. ID. Matched. Time of death. Logged. Signature. Present. No gaps. No extra pages. Nothing that stood out. I went through it again anyway. Then again. Everything aligned. I felt that brief moment of relief. The kind that comes when there's nothing to catch. That should have been enough. But I didn't move right away. I don't know why. Maybe habit. Maybe something else. I stood there, looking at the page longer than necessary. Then I noticed the ink. It was slightly smudged near the signature. Not unusual on its own. Pens drag. Paper shifts. But the smudge cut across part of the printed name underneath. Just enough to blur two letters. I leaned closer. Read it again. Then again. The name was still legible. But not clean. I checked the ID number. Solid. No issue. I checked the digital entry. It matched the printed one. Everything was correct. Except that small imperfection. I almost let it go. That's the part that stays with me. I almost let it go. Because it didn't break anything. Because everything else was fine. Because correcting something that small felt unnecessary. I picked up the pen. Hovered over the logbook. Ready to write. Then I stopped. That pause again. Short. Quiet. But there. I put the pen down. Went back to the file. Looked at the name again. Then at the smudge. Then back at the name. Something didn't match. Not in a clear way. In a way that felt like doubt. I opened the digital system. Pulled up the patient record using the ID. The name appeared. Clear. No smudge. No ambiguity. I compared it again to the paper. The letters lined up. But the blurred part could have been read two ways. One letter or another. Close enough to mistake if you weren't careful. I felt that slow tightening in my chest. Not fear. Recognition. I had seen this kind of thing before. Not the exact situation. The pattern. Something small. Something easy to ignore. Something that only mattered if it connected to something else. I checked previous entries. Scrolled through recent records. Names. Dates. Numbers. Looking for overlap. And then I saw it. A name from earlier that week. Not identical. One letter different. Same position. The exact letter that was smudged on the paper in front of me. I sat back slowly. The room felt colder. Or maybe I just noticed it more. I pulled up that earlier record. Compared them side by side. Different IDs. Different dates. But the names were close enough that, if misread, they could become the same. I looked back at the paper. At the smudge. At the way the ink had spread just enough to remove certainty. I understood what could happen. If I logged this incorrectly, even by one letter, it would connect to the wrong record. Not immediately. Later. When someone searched. When someone matched documents. When someone didn't double-check because everything looked right. The mistake wouldn't be visible here. It would show up somewhere else. Quietly. I sat there for a long time. Longer than I should have. Thinking about how easy it would be to choose one version of the name and move on. How no one would question it tonight. How it would look correct either way unless someone went back to the original source. I thought about fixing it quietly if it turned out wrong. Like before. I thought about not noticing at all. Which would be worse? The phone was there. Same as always. I didn't reach for it immediately. I picked up the file instead. Walked back to the gurney. Looked at the tag attached upstairs. The name there was printed. Clear. No smudge. I compared it to the paper. They matched. That should have settled it. But it didn't. Because the official document, the one that would be archived, was still unclear. I went back to the desk. Picked up the phone. Called the department upstairs. It rang. Then again. Finally, someone answered. I gave them the ID. Asked them to confirm the name exactly as it should be recorded. There was a pause. Then they read it out. Letter by letter. Slowly. I wrote it down. Carefully. Compared it to both versions in my head. One matched. One didn't. The smudge had hidden the correct one. I thanked them. Hung up. Then I rewrote the name in the logbook. Clear. Precise. No ambiguity. After that, I filled in the rest. Finished the intake. Placed the body. Closed the chamber. The clicks sounded louder than usual. Final. The rest of the shift passed without anything else. No more intakes. No more calls. Just the hum. And my own thoughts. In the morning, I left like I always did. Through the same doors. Into the same gray light. But something felt different. Not relief. Not tension. Just clarity. It wasn't about catching big mistakes. It never was. It was about the small ones. The ones that don't look like anything at the time. The ones you can explain away. The ones that fit just enough to pass. That's where everything starts. I thought about the first night again. How easy it had been to assume. To move without checking. To trust the flow instead of the details. I don't do that anymore. Not because I'm better. Because I know exactly what happens if I don't stop. If I don't question. If I don't sit in that uncomfortable pause before deciding. People think mistakes are loud. Obvious. They're not. They're quiet. They look normal. They move through systems without resistance. Until they don't. I still work there. Same shifts. Same desk. Same cold air that never changes. Nothing about the place feels different. But I do. In small ways. In the way I hold a pen before writing. In the way I read a name twice, even when it's clear. In the way I don't trust anything just because it looks complete. I don't think about leaving anymore. Because I understand what this job really is. It's not about handling what's already finished. It's about making sure nothing gets lost on the way there. Quietly. Carefully. Without assuming anything. I still check every tag twice.